The clock on the cement wall of Montana's High Plains Animal Shelter ticked mercilessly toward 5 p.m. In cage C-17, a German shepherd with unusual markings pressed himself against the back wall, amber eyes flickering with terror. The shelter staff called him the monster behind closed doors, too large, too strange-looking for adoption, too broken to rehabilitate. His paperwork read simply, "Euthanasia scheduled today, 5:00 p.m. Deputy Director Simmons checked his watch. "Time to prep the room," he muttered to the weekend volunteer. The girl nodded, tears welling. As the metal syringe was being filled 3 rooms away, the shelter's front door flew open. A woman with weathered skin and determined eyes strode to the front desk, her silver-streaked black hair catching the fluorescent light. "I'm here for C-17, she announced, voice steady as stone. "Ma'am, that dog is scheduled for—" "I know exactly what he's scheduled for," she interrupted, "and I'm here to stop it. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story." Shadow wasn't always his name. Born in the spring of 2023 in a dimly lit barn on the outskirts of Whitefish, Montana, he came into the world as Runt 3, the last of his litter, and immediately different from his siblings. While the other German Shepherd puppies developed the traditional black and tan markings, Shadow emerged with an unusual silver-gray coat that darkened almost to black along his spine, with piercing amber eyes that seemed to hold wisdom beyond his years. Jack Wilson ran what locals called a respectable breeding operation, though few had seen behind the weathered doors of his facility. For 20 years, he'd supplied German Shepherds to police departments and wealthy families across 3 states, building a reputation for dogs with perfect bloodlines and impeccable temperaments. Shadow, with his unusual coloring and oversized paws, threatened that reputation. Autumn Running Wolf hadn't planned on adopting a dog when she returned to the Blackfeet Reservation after 15 years away. At 45, the lines around her eyes told stories of both laughter and hardship. Her photography had taken her around the world, capturing everything from Arctic ice flows to Saharan sunsets. But it was the animals that always drew her lens, particularly those forgotten or overlooked. Her modest cabin, nestled where the mountains met the plains, served as both studio and sanctuary. Dr. Mason Thompson ran the only veterinary clinic that served both the reservation and 3 neighboring towns. A third-generation Montanan with kind eyes and hands gentled by decades of healing, he'd known Autumn since she was a girl, with scraped knees and a camera too big for her small hands. He'd been the first to welcome her home, and the first to warn her about the breeding situation that had developed during her absence. The landscape itself was a character in this story, brutal winters giving way to spectacular springs, mountains standing sentinel over vast grasslands. The reservation land held both beauty and hardship in equal measure. It was a place where creatures either adapted or perished, where resilience wasn't just admired but required for survival. It was into this world that Shadow would eventually find himself thrust. A world where his differences might finally be seen not as flaws but as gifts yet to be discovered. Shadow's first 8 weeks of life passed in a blur of confusion and isolation. While his littermates romped and played, developing the confident temperament German Shepherds were known for, Shadow was kept separate. Jack Wilson had inspected the litter daily, his weathered face creasing with displeasure each time he examined the odd-colored pup. "Genetic throwback," he muttered to his assistant Brady one morning. "Look at that coat pattern. Ain't right. And those eyes, too wild-looking." Jack's breeding program had a reputation to maintain. Police departments paid premium prices for his dogs, and they expected uniformity. Shadow, with his silvery gray coat that darkened almost to black along his spine, was evidence of something gone wrong in Jack's carefully controlled bloodlines. "Should we cull him?" Brady asked, the casual cruelty in his voice making Shadow cower further in his segregated pen. Jack considered it briefly before shaking his head. "Nah, Might be able to offload him as a pet to some family that don't know any better. Just keep him separate from the others. Don't want those departments seeing him when they come to select pups. As the weeks passed, Shadow's isolation deepened. Without the rough-and-tumble play of his siblings, he never learned proper dog socialization. Without regular human handling, he grew fearful of quick movements and loud voices. By the time he reached 8 weeks, when the other puppies were being placed with police departments or carefully vetted families, Shadow had developed a permanent hunch to his shoulders, as if perpetually bracing for a blow. "Nobody's gonna want this one," Jack declared after a potential buyer took one look at Shadow and immediately requested to see normal puppies instead. "Those eyes give me the creeps anyway. Looks like he's judging me." That night, after the property had gone quiet, Jack loaded Shadow into a metal crate and drove 30 miles to the High Plains Animal Shelter. The shelter, a low-slung concrete building on the outskirts of Browning, was already over capacity. Its harsh fluorescent lighting and constant barking created a cacophony of misery that hit Shadow like a physical blow when Jack carried his crate inside. "Got a drop-off," Jack announced to the tired-looking attendant. He'd removed his signature hat and jacket, not wanting to be recognized. The woman sighed. "We're really full right now. Is there any way you could—" "Found him on my property," Jack lied smoothly. "Can't keep him. Don't know what he is. Might be part wolf or something with those eyes. Probably dangerous." The word wolf made the attendant look at Shadow with new wariness. In rural Montana, wolf-dog hybrids had a bad reputation, and the shelter had a near-sodomatic euthanasia policy for them due to adoption difficulties. Shadow was processed into the system as a German Shepherd mix, possible wolf hybrid, despite being a purebred with documented lineage. The designation was essentially a death sentence, but Jack didn't care. By the time he walked out the shelter door, he'd already forgotten Shadow's existence, focused instead on the new breeding pair arriving from Germany the following week. The shelter environment proved nightmarish for Shadow. The concrete floor was cold, the sounds overwhelming, and the smells of fear and sickness permeated everything. Shelter workers approached his cage cautiously, influenced by the possible wolf hybrid label and his unusual appearance. When one tried to touch him, Shadow cowered and trembled so violently that the worker noted extreme fear aggression on his chart, another black mark against him. For 3 weeks, Shadow existed in a limbo of fear and confusion. His food was delivered by a metal pole pushed through the cage bars, his water the same. No one touched him. No one spoke gently to him. Other dogs came and went, but Shadow remained, his chances for adoption diminishing with each passing day. "And that one in C-17 hasn't improved at all," Shelter Director Simmons remarked during a staff meeting. "Still won't let anyone near him. Can't adopt out a large breed with those issues, especially not with those wolf-like features." Deputy Director Harris nodded in agreement. "Plus, we've got 6 new intakes coming tomorrow from that hoarding situation in Great Falls. We need the space." The decision was made with clinical efficiency. Shadow, never given a proper name at the shelter, was scheduled for euthanasia. The weekend volunteer, a college student named Lily, fought back tears when she saw the red mark on his cage card. She'd been trying to make progress with him, sitting quietly near his cage, sometimes reading aloud from her textbooks. She'd noticed how his ears would perk up at certain words, how his intelligent eyes followed her movement. The shelter policy was clear, and Shadow's time had run out. But as Shadow's imminent euthanasia might never have reached beyond the shelter walls if not for Lily's Instagram post that evening. With tears streaking her cheeks, she photographed Shadow pressed against the back of his cage and wrote a passionate plea. "This beautiful soul will be euthanized tomorrow at 5 p.m. No one will give him a chance because he looks too different. Sometimes the most unique souls are the most special. I wish I could save him. Last chance, Shelter Dog, Montana." The post caught the attention of few people, most offering sympathetic emojis but nothing more. But shortly before midnight, it appeared on the feed of Autumn Running Wolf, who was finalizing plans for her documentary project on native wildlife. Something about the haunted look in the dog's amber eyes stopped her cold. She'd seen that same look in wolves she'd photographed. Intelligent, wary, assessing, but she also saw something deeper. Profound loneliness. Autumn had not intended to adopt a dog. Her life of travel and unpredictable schedules didn't seem conducive to pet ownership, but as she stared at the photo of Shadow, something stirred within her. A recognition of kindred spirits, perhaps, or simply the call of one outcast to another. Before she could second-guess herself, she messaged Lily for details about the shelter's location and opening hours. "I'll be there," she wrote, "first thing tomorrow. Hold on, buddy. Someone sees you." Autumn drove through the pre-dawn darkness with a sense of urgency she couldn't quite explain. Her old pickup truck groaned in protest as she pushed it along the winding roads leading from her cabin to the High Plains Animal Shelter. The Montana landscape unfurled around her. Mountains silhouetted against the lightening sky, vast plains stretching into distance. By the time she pulled into the shelter's cracked asphalt parking lot, the sun was just beginning to illuminate the dreary concrete building. "We opened at 8, called a young woman who was unlocking the front door. Autumn recognized her from the profile picture as Lily, the volunteer who had posted about Shadow. "I'm here about the German Shepherd in C-17, Autumn said, stepping out of her truck. "The one scheduled for today." Recognition dawned on Lily's face. "You're the photographer. You messaged me last night." Hope and wariness battled in her expression. "You're really here for him?" Autumn nodded, wrapping her jacket tighter against the morning chill. "I'd like to meet him, at least." Inside, the shelter was already alive with sound, barking, whining, the clatter of metal food bowls. The smell hit Autumn immediately, disinfectant barely masking the underlying sense of animal waste and fear. She followed Lily down a narrow corridor lined with cages, conscious of eyes tracking her movement, of paws reaching through bars. "He's back here," Lily said, leading Autumn to a section marked Limited Access. They put him in isolation after he growled at one of the staff, but he was scared, not aggressive. They just didn't take the time to see the difference. The cage at the end of the row was set apart from the others. It took Autumn's eyes a moment to locate Shadow in the dim light. He was pressed against the back wall, almost invisible except for the gleam of his amber eyes. "Hey there," Autumn said softly, crouching down to his level but maintaining distance from the cage. She didn't reach in or make sudden movements. Instead, she simply sat on the cold concrete floor and waited. Minutes passed. Lily hovered nearby, watching anxiously as Autumn remained motionless, her breathing deliberate and calm. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Shadow shifted. His nose twitched. His ears, previously flattened against his skull, moved forward slightly. "He's never responded to anyone like that," Lily whispered. "It's deciding if I'm trustworthy," Autumn replied without taking her eyes off Shadow. "Respect is a two-way street, especially with creatures who've been betrayed." For nearly an hour, Autumn sat in communion with the frightened dog. She spoke occasionally in her low, melodic voice, not baby talk, but dignified conversation, as if Shadow could understand every word. She told him about her cabin in the mountains, about the deer that visited at dawn, about the way sunlight filtered through pine trees in late afternoon. Finally, Shadow took a tentative step forward, then another. He remained wary but curious. When he was within a few feet of the cage door, he lay down, chin on his paws, eyes never leaving Autumn's face. "I'd like to take him," Autumn told Lily. Lily's face fell. "It's not that simple. The director needs to approve all adoptions. and he's already decided this dog is unadoptable. That's why he's scheduled for today, and I need to speak with the director." Director Simmons was not pleased to be confronted first thing in the morning. His office, a cluttered space with outdated filing cabinets and a desk buried under paperwork, smelled of coffee and resignation. "Miss Running Wolf, I understand your concern, but this animal has been assessed by professional staff," he explained, not unkindly but with finality. "He shows signs of fear aggression, possible wolf hybrid characteristics, and he's been rejected by multiple potential adopters. We simply don't have the resources to rehabilitate every difficult case." "I'm not asking you to rehabilitate him," Autumn countered. "I'm asking you to give him a chance with someone willing to try. With me." "Get it?" "Have you ever owned a German Shepherd before? Or any large breed with behavioral issues?" "I've spent 20 years photographing wild wolves across North America. I know canine behavior better than most trainers." Director Simmons raised an eyebrow. "Wildlife photography and pet ownership are hardly the same thing." "No," Autumn agreed, "they're not. But understanding an animal's natural instincts, respecting its boundaries, and building trust are universal principles." She leaned forward. "That dog isn't aggressive, he's terrified. And with good reason, from what I can see of how he's been treated." The standoff continued for nearly 30 minutes. Autumn presented her case methodically while Simmons countered with shelter policies and liability concerns. It wasn't until Autumn mentioned her connections with several national wildlife publications that might be interested in a story about shelter practices that Simmons's resistance began to weaken. "Even if I wanted to approve this," he said finally, "there's paperwork, home checks, references. I can provide whatever you need. But it needs to happen today." Autumn's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "That dog is not dying because someone found him inconvenient." By noon, Autumn had completed a stack of forms, paid an adoption fee that Simmons had mysteriously doubled due to special handling requirements, and signed multiple liability waivers. She had also spoken by phone with Dr. Thompson, who agreed to vouch for her character and provide immediate veterinary support if needed. The final hurdle was getting Shadow into her truck. The shelter staff insisted on sedating him for the transfer, standard procedure for aggressive animals. But Autumn refused. "No drugs. I want him aware and conscious of what's happening. If he can't trust the process from the beginning, we'll never build a foundation." Instead, she asked for time alone with Shadow in the shelter's small meet-and-greet yard. There, with infinite patience, she sat on the ground with a slip lead loosely coiled in her lap. She spoke to Shadow continuously, her voice a lifeline in his world of fear. "I know you don't understand what's happening," she told him. "Everything is changing again, and change hasn't been kind to you so far. But I promise you this. Whatever happens next, we face it together. You are not alone anymore." It took 2 hours. Staff members watched through the window as Shadow gradually moved closer to Autumn, circling her, retreating, advancing again. No one had seen anything like it, this silent communication between woman and dog. When Shadow finally allowed Autumn to slip the lead over his head, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the watching staff, quickly hushed when the dog startled. As the shelter clock approached 5 p.m., the very hour originally scheduled for Shadow's euthanasia, Autumn opened the door of her truck. Without pulling on the lead, she simply stood waiting. After a long moment of consideration, Shadow jumped inside, turning immediately to press himself against the far door. "That's okay," Autumn murmured as she climbed into the driver's seat. "We've got all the time in the world now." The journey from the High Plains Animal Shelter to Autumn's cabin took just over an hour, but for Shadow it might as well have been a voyage to another planet. He remained pressed against the passenger door for the entire drive, his body tense, his breathing rapid. Autumn made no attempt to touch him. Instead, she kept up a steady, gentle monologue, her voice becoming a constant in his world of uncertainty. "We're heading home now," she told him as the truck wound its way out of town and into the foothills. "It's quiet where I live, just the sounds of wind and birds, and sometimes a fox that comes to visit at dusk. You might like the fox. He minds his own business just like you do." As the landscape changed from open plains to pine-covered hills, Shadow's breathing gradually slowed. His amber eyes darted between Autumn and the window, tracking the transformation outside. When they finally turned onto the unpaved road leading to Autumn's property, his ears perked forward for the first time. "That's right," Autumn said, noticing the subtle change. "We're almost there." The cabin stood in a small clearing backed by a forest with a view of the mountains beyond. It was modest, weathered cedar siding, a covered porch with a swing, a woodpile stacked neatly against the north wall. A simple structure, but it radiated something Shadow had never experienced: peace. Getting Shadow from the truck into the cabin presented the first real challenge. He refused to move, frozen in place when Autumn opened the passenger door. It's all right," she told him, stepping back to remove any sense of pressure. "We'll wait until you're ready." Darkness fell. The temperature dropped. Still, Autumn waited, occasionally speaking softly to Shadow but never forcing him. Finally, nearly 3 hours after their arrival, hunger or curiosity overcame fear. Shadow cautiously jumped down from the truck and immediately darted under the porch, where he remained, visible only as a pair of glowing eyes in the darkness. "That's a start," Autumn murmured, closing the truck door at last. That first night established the pattern for the weeks that followed. Autumn provided food and water, placing both near the porch steps and then retreating to give Shadow space. She carried on with her normal routine, chopping wood, tending her small garden, working in her studio, always aware of those watchful eyes tracking her movements. On the third day, Dr. Thompson visited, bringing supplies Autumn had requested: a proper dog bed, high-quality food, a gentle leader harness, and basic medical supplies. "How's our patient?" he asked, setting down his bag on the porch. "Still under the porch," Autumn replied. "But he ate all his food last night, and I think he slept a little." Dr. Thompson nodded. "Expected, given what he's been through. Mind if I take a look at him? No handling, just a visual assessment." Together they knelt and peered into the darkness beneath the porch. Shadow had retreated to the farthest corner, his body language communicating absolute terror. "Brief fella," the veterinarian murmured. "He's severely underweight. And see how he's holding that left front leg? I'd bet money he's got an old injury that never healed properly." He straightened, brushing dirt from his knees. "But his eyes are clear, and his coat, though filthy, doesn't show signs of serious skin conditions. Physically, with proper care, he should recover." "And the other issues?" Autumn asked. Dr. Thompson's expression turned grave. "The emotional trauma. That's harder to predict. Some dogs never fully recover from this level of neglect and fear. It'll take time, patience, and accepting that he may always carry some scars you can't see." Autumn nodded, her resolve unwavering. "Good thing I've got plenty of time, then." Days turned into weeks. Shadow gradually expanded his territory from under the porch to the perimeter of the clearing around the cabin. He still wouldn't allow Autumn to touch him, but he no longer fled when she approached. Progress came in small victories. The first time Shadow ate while Autumn sat nearby. The morning he emerged from beneath the porch at her gentle call. The evening he chose to lie on the dog bed she'd placed on the porch, rather than retreating to his underground sanctuary. "You're doing remarkable work with him," Dr. Thompson said during his fourth visit, watching from the cabin window as Shadow cautiously explored the edge of the forest. "Most people would have given up by now." Autumn shook her head. "He's not a project. He's a kindred spirit." The turning point came in late November, nearly 2 months after Shadow's arrival. Montana's early winter had brought the first substantial snowfall, transforming the landscape into a pristine white canvas. Autumn woke to find Shadow sitting on the porch, staring at the altered world with evident confusion. She stepped outside, coffee mug in hand, and sat in her usual place on the porch swing. To her surprise, Shadow approached, stopping just beyond arm's reach. He studied her intently, then lifted his gaze to the white expanse beyond the porch. "It's just snow," Autumn told him softly. "Nothing to be afraid of." As if understanding her words, Shadow cautiously descended the porch steps. He placed one paw on the snow, then another, his head swiveling back to Autumn as if seeking reassurance. When she smiled and nodded, he ventured further, soon discovering the joy of bounding through the powdery drifts. Autumn watched, tears forming in her eyes as Shadow, the dog deemed too dangerous to adopt, the animal scheduled for death, experienced perhaps his first moment of pure, unbridled joy. He leaped and pounced, sending snow flying in glittering arcs around him. And then, most miraculous of all, he turned to look at Autumn and barked, a clear invitation to join his newfound game. That snowy morning marked a transformation. The wall of fear that had separated them began to crumble. By Christmas, Shadow was sleeping inside the cabin, still on his own bed near the door, but present, part of the household. By January, he had begun to accept brief touches, a gentle stroke along his back, a scratch behind his ears. Each contact lasted only seconds before he would move away, but each represented monumental progress. As winter deepened, Autumn began incorporating Shadow into her work routine. Her current project, documenting wildlife corridors in the northern Rockies, required long hours in her studio, editing images and writing accompanying text. To her surprise, Shadow proved to be an excellent studio companion, settling quietly nearby as she worked, occasionally pressing his nose against her hand when she became too absorbed in her task. "You're reminding me to take breaks, aren't you?" she asked him one afternoon, stretching her stiff shoulders. "Smart boy." Inspired, Autumn began photographing Shadow as well. His graceful form against snow-covered mountains, his intent focus as he tracked a rabbit's path, his peaceful countenance as he basked in rare winter sunshine. These images, interspersed with her wildlife photographs, told a different but complementary story. The journey of a creature finding its place in the world. On a whim, Autumn posted some of these photographs on her professional Instagram account, where she normally shared only her wildlife and landscape images. She included a brief caption about Shadow's journey from death row to mountain life. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in, expressions of admiration for Shadow's resilience, gratitude for Autumn's patience, questions about his progress and personality. "Looks like you've struck a chord," Dr. Thompson remarked during a routine checkup in February. Shadow, now comfortable enough with the veterinarian to allow basic examination, sat calmly as the doctor checked his ears. "People love a redemption story." "It's not about redemption," Autumn replied thoughtfully. "It's about recognition, seeing the worth in something others discarded." As winter gave way to spring, Shadow continued his remarkable transformation. The fearful skeletal animal had filled out into a magnificent German shepherd, his unusual coloring now striking silver gray that gleamed in the sunlight. His movements, once hesitant and painful, became fluid and powerful. Most stunning was the change in his eyes. Still that unusual amber, but now filled with curiosity and intelligence rather than terror. Anna's photography exhibition in Denver had been planned long before Shadow entered her life. As the May opening approached, she faced a dilemma. Leaving Shadow with a sitter seemed impossible given his history of abandonment, but bringing him to a crowded city gallery opening presented its own challenges. "He's come so far," she told Dr. Thompson, "but a crowd of strangers, loud noises, confined spaces. It could undo months of progress." "What does your gut tell you?" the veterinarian asked. Autumn considered the question carefully. That separating would be worse. That we need to face this together, just like everything else. And so, after careful preparation, including several practice drives to increasingly populated areas, Autumn and Shadow set out for Denver in late April. They traveled slowly, stopping frequently at quiet parks and nature areas where Shadow could stretch his legs away from crowds. They stayed in pet-friendly accommodations that Autumn had meticulously researched in advance. Shadow surprised her with his adaptability. While clearly less comfortable than in their mountain sanctuary, he remained calm and attentive, his focus on Autumn providing the anchor he needed in unfamiliar surroundings. By the time they reached Denver and settled into their rented apartment near the Gallery District, Shadow had developed a newfound confidence in navigating the human world. The exhibition, titled Corridors, Passages Through Wilderness, featured Autumn's signature wildlife photography alongside a special section dedicated to Shadow's journey. The gallery owner, initially skeptical about including dog photos in a serious wildlife exhibition, had been won over when he saw the power of the images and the story they told. On opening night, Autumn took special precautions. Shadow wore a vest clearly marked, "Please ask before approaching," and a quiet room was set aside where he could retreat if the crowds became overwhelming. To Autumn's amazement, however, Shadow handled the evening with remarkable poise. He stayed close to her side, watchful but not fearful, accepting gentle attention from those who asked permission to greet him. "Is this the famous Shadow?" asked visitors throughout the evening, many having followed his story online. Children approached respectfully, seniors commented on his noble bearing, and more than one person shared stories of their own rescue animals. The exhibition was a critical and commercial success. Art reviewers praised Autumn's ability to capture both the majesty of wild landscapes and the intimate journey of one domestic animal finding his place in the world. Sales exceeded expectations, with several of Shadow's portraits being among the first to sell. Media coverage extended beyond art publications to mainstream outlets, many focusing on the compelling rescue story behind the image. As Autumn's professional profile rose, so did Shadow's. His Instagram following grew exponentially, with people from around the world invested in his continuing journey. Autumn carefully curated what she shared, protective of their private life while recognizing the power of Shadow's story to inspire others. "You've become quite the celebrity," she told him one evening as they walked through a quiet Denver park, away from the hustle of the Gallery District. Shadow responded with a gentle bump of his head against her hand, a gesture that had become his signature display of affection. Their extended stay in Denver, initially planned for just the exhibition opening, stretched into weeks as additional galleries requested showings and media interviews multiplied. Shadow adapted to city life with remarkable resilience, though Autumn could tell he missed the mountains as much as she did. It was during an interview with a local television station, filmed at the gallery, that the first hint of trouble appeared. The reporter, a young woman named Jessica Martinez, had just finished asking about Autumn's photography techniques when her gaze fixed on Shadow, who was resting quietly nearby. "This dog," she said suddenly, her voice dropping. "Where did you get him?" "Was scheduled for euthanasia at a shelter in Montana," Autumn replied, the answer now well rehearsed from numerous interviews. "They labeled him unadoptable." Jessica shook her head slowly. "I've seen him before, or one just like him. My cousin's husband breeds German Shepherds in Montana. He had one with that same unusual coloring." Autumn felt a chill that had nothing to do with the gallery's air conditioning. "Does your cousin's husband have a name?" "Jack Wilson," Jessica replied. "He's pretty well known in breeding circles." The interview continued, but Autumn's mind was elsewhere, connecting dots she should have seen months ago. Shadow's unusual appearance, his severe fear responses, the suspicious circumstances of his surrender to the shelter. It all pointed to a darker story than she had imagined. That evening, back in their rented apartment, Autumn researched Jack Wilson's breeding operation. The website showcased gleaming facilities and perfect German Shepherds with traditional markings. Customer testimonials praised the temperament and trainability of his dogs. Police departments in 3 states listed him as a preferred vendor. But beneath this polished surface, buried in online forums and local news archives, Autumn found disturbing whispers. Former employees hinting at questionable practices, occasional complaints about health issues and puppies that didn't match the advertised quality. Nothing concrete enough for legal action, but enough to raise serious concerns. "What really happened to you?" she asked Shadow, who had positioned himself at her feet as she worked. He raised his head at her troubled tone, those amber eyes reflecting intelligence that sometimes seemed almost human in its depth of understanding. The next morning, Autumn made 2 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Thompson, asking him to discreetly look into any available records on Shadow's origins. The second was to Lily at the shelter, requesting the exact intake information from when Shadow was surrendered. Lily's response came first. The surrender form lists him as a stray, found wandering near property owned by someone who wished to remain anonymous, she reported. But I remember that night. The guy was nervous, kept looking at the security cameras, said the dog might be part wolf and was probably dangerous. Dr. Thompson's investigation yielded more disturbing information. "I've been asking around," he told Autumn. "Wilson had a litter last spring from a new breeding pair he imported from Germany at great expense. Word is one of the puppies came out with unusual coloring, a throwback to some recessive gene. Wilson was furious because it suggested his expensive breeding stock wasn't as pure as advertised." The pieces were fitting together, forming a picture that made Autumn's stomach tighten with anger. Shadow wasn't just any abandoned dog. He was a deliberate discard, rejected for the very traits that made him unique. His life deemed less valuable than a breeder's reputation. As their time in Denver extended into May, Autumn noticed subtle changes in Shadow's behavior. In the gallery, he began paying particular attention to certain visitors, especially those who approached with genuine interest in the photographs, rather than in meeting the famous rescue dog. He seemed to have developed an uncanny ability to sense people's intentions and emotions. Most remarkable was his reaction to children. While still cautious, he showed particular gentleness with the youngest visitors, often choosing to sit near children who seemed shy or uncomfortable in the gallery setting. Parents repeatedly commented on how their normally restless children became calm in Shadow's presence. "He's not just recovering," Autumn realized. "He's discovering his purpose." The breakthrough came during a private showing for a group of environmental donors. Among them was an older gentleman named Thomas Whitefeather, a respected elder from the Northern Cheyenne tribe and a significant supporter of wildlife conservation efforts. "Your dog," Thomas said quietly to Autumn as others examined her photographs. "He carries medicine." Autumn glanced at Shadow, who had chosen to position himself near the elder. "Medicine?" Thomas nodded slowly. "Old ones said some creatures bridge worlds. They understand things beyond human knowing. Your Shadow, he sees into people. It is a gift." He knelt, despite his arthritic knees, to meet Shadow at eye level. "He was thrown away because they could not see his value, but you did." The elder's words stayed with Autumn long after the event. She had rescued Shadow, yes, but he had also transformed her life in ways she couldn't have anticipated. Her art had taken on new dimensions. Her perspective had shifted from documenting wilderness to exploring the connections between all living beings. And perhaps most importantly, her solitary existence had opened to include true partnership. As spring blossomed fully, Autumn made preparations to return to Montana. Despite the professional opportunities Denver offered, both she and Shadow belonged in the mountains. They would return for exhibitions and events, but their home, their true territory, awaited them in the wild places. On their last evening in the city, Autumn took Shadow to a quiet overlook in a park above Denver. As the setting sun painted the distant mountains gold, she sat with her arm around her companion's powerful shoulders. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she murmured. Shadow pressed closer in response, his solid warmth a reminder of all they had overcome together. What neither of them could know as they gazed toward the mountains that called them home was that their journey was far from complete. The secret of Shadow's origins was about to collide with his newfound fame, bringing challenges neither had anticipated, and revelations that would test the bond they had forged through patience, courage, and unconditional acceptance. The return to Montana brought a welcome sense of homecoming. Shadow bounded from Autumn's truck the moment they arrived at the cabin, racing through the familiar clearing and along the forest edge, his silver-gray coat flashing between pine trees like a spirit of the woods. Autumn watched him, smiling at his evident joy at being back in their mountain sanctuary. "All looks good on you," she called as he circled back to her, amber eyes bright with excitement. Summer in the northern Rockies unfolded in a tapestry of long golden days and star-filled nights. Shadow's confidence continued to grow, his personality emerging more fully now that he was back in familiar territory. He accompanied Autumn on her photography excursions into the wilderness, proving to be an excellent trail companion, alert to changes in weather, respectful of the wildlife they encountered, patient during the long hours Autumn sometimes spent waiting for perfect light. The story of their Denver exhibition had spread even to their remote corner of Montana. Occasional visitors now made the journey to Autumn's cabin, gallery owners interested in her work, journalists seeking interviews, wildlife conservationists drawn by the intersection of her art and activism. Shadow greeted each with his now characteristic assessment, remaining aloof with some while offering immediate friendship to others, his judgment proving unerring. "That dog of yours," remarked a visiting curator from Seattle, "should work security. He took one look at my assistant and practically rolled out the welcome mat. Took one look at my driver and wouldn't let him pass the porch." Autumn nodded thoughtfully. "He sees things we miss." The curator laughed. "Well, between us, the driver has been skimming from my expense account. I confirmed it last week." By midsummer, Autumn had begun work on a new book project, a photographic exploration of conservation efforts across tribal lands, featuring Shadow as both subject and metaphor for survival against difficult odds. The advance from the publisher was substantial, reflecting Autumn's rising status in the art world, and allowed her to expand her studio space and upgrade her equipment. Shadow's Instagram following, meanwhile, had grown to over 500,000. Autumn limited her posts to once or twice weekly, protective of their privacy while acknowledging the platform Shadow's story provided for animal welfare advocacy. Each post generated thousands of comments, many sharing similar stories of rescue and redemption. "You're doing important work," Dr. Thompson told her during a routine checkup for Shadow in July. "The shelter says their adoption rates for difficult cases have tripled since your exhibition. People are specifically asking for the dogs no one else wants." Autumn stroked Shadow's head as he submitted to the veterinarian's examination with newfound patience. "He's the one doing the work. I'm just the photographer." It was in late July when the first sign of trouble appeared. Autumn was sorting through mail that had accumulated while they were in Denver, mostly bills and promotional flyers, when she came across an official-looking envelope from Wilson Kennels. Inside was a brief typed note. "Well, all right. I believe you have my dog, German Shepherd. Unusual silver-gray coloring, born April 2023. This animal is valuable breeding stock and was stolen from my property. Please contact me immediately to arrange return." It was signed simply Jack Wilson, with a phone number and email address. Autumn's hands trembled as she reread the note. Shadow, sensing her distress, pressed against her legs, looking up with concerned eyes. "It's okay," she assured him, though her voice lacked conviction. "We'll figure this out." The claim was absurd, of course. Shadow had been surrendered to a shelter, processed through proper channels, and legally adopted. Yet the boldness of Wilson's assertion suggested he might pursue the matter further. More disturbing was the implication that he now saw Shadow as valuable breeding stock, the very animal he had once discarded as defective. Autumn's first call was to Dr. Thompson, who listened to her read Wilson's letter with growing concern. "This is troubling," he admitted. "Wilson has connections in the area, political, financial, and technically, if he can prove Shadow was his property and was surrendered without his authorization, he might have a legal case." "That's ridiculous," Autumn protested. "He's the one who abandoned Shadow in the first place." "Which he'll deny, I am sure. Look, let me make some calls. I know a good animal rights attorney in Helena. Meanwhile, don't respond to Wilson, and keep Shadow close." The advice was sound, but difficult to follow. Over the next 2 weeks, Wilson escalated his efforts. A registered letter arrived from his attorney demanding Shadow's return. Then came phone calls, which Autumn let go to voicemail. Finally, a black SUV appeared at the end of her long driveway one afternoon, remaining there for hours before finally departing as dusk fell. Shadow, always sensitive to Autumn's emotions, became increasingly vigilant. He no longer wandered the property freely, but stayed within sight of the cabin. At night, he positioned himself by the bedroom door rather than on his usual bed near the window. His behavior confirmed what Autumn already knew. Their peace had been shattered. The attorney Dr. Thompson recommended, a no-nonsense woman named Sarah Redfeather, reviewed the case with grim efficiency. "Here's the situation," she told Autumn during their first meeting in her modest Helena office. "Wilson claims the dog was stolen from his property and taken to the shelter without his knowledge. He's now filed papers demanding the return of what he calls valuable breeding stock, with rare genetic traits worth, according to him, upwards of $50,000. "That's insane," Autumn said. "He was the one who dumped Shadow because he didn't meet breed standards." Sarah nodded. "Which we'll need to prove. Do you have documentation of Shadow's condition when you adopted him? Medical records from his time at the shelter? Anything showing neglect or mistreatment?" Autumn had everything: photographs, medical assessments, the shelter's intake forms. What she didn't have was direct proof that Jack Wilson himself had surrendered Shadow, as he'd apparently given a false name on the surrender form. "This will get messy," Sarah warned. "Wilson breeds dogs for police departments across 3 states. He has friends in influential positions, and he's claiming that the unusual coloring he once rejected now makes Shadow valuable for breeding." "Shadow is neutered," Autumn pointed out, "which will only make Wilson angrier, claiming you destroyed valuable property." Sarah sighed. "I'll file our response to his demand letter. Meanwhile, I suggest you keep a low profile. Maybe consider temporarily removing Shadow's photos from social media." That evening, Autumn sat on her porch swing, watching the sunset paint the mountains with amber light. Shadow lay at her feet, his head on her shoes in a gesture of trust that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. "I won't let him take you," she promised, her voice fierce with determination. "Whatever it takes." August brought heat, wildfire smoke hanging in the valleys, and legal proceedings. Wilson's attorney filed a formal complaint in Montana District Court demanding Shadow's return plus damages for loss of breeding potential. Autumn's modest savings quickly dwindled as legal bills mounted. Several scheduled speaking engagements and exhibition openings were postponed as the case consumed her time and emotional energy. The first court hearing, a preliminary proceeding to establish basic facts, was set for mid-September. As that date approached, Autumn received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Whitefeather, The Northern Cheyenne elder she had met in Denver arrived at her cabin one morning, having driven 5 hours from his home on the reservation. "I heard about your trouble," he said simply when she opened the door. "The dog with medicine is being threatened." Shadow, normally cautious with visitors, immediately approached Thomas, pressing his head against the elder's hand in greeting. "He remembers you," Autumn said, surprised. Thomas nodded. "We recognize each other." He settled on the porch, his aged joints protesting the long drive. "This man who claims a dog, he seeks to own what cannot be owned. The spirit that lives in your shadow was never his to take or give." Autumn brought coffee, and they sat together on the porch, watching as Shadow patrolled the perimeter of the clearing, more alert than usual. "I'm afraid," Autumn admitted, "the legal system sees animals as property. If Wilson can convince a judge that Shadow was stolen rather than surrendered—" Thomas sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Sometimes the law does not serve justice. But I did not come only to offer words." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded newspaper clipping. "This was in our tribal newspaper last week." The article was small, just a few paragraphs about an investigation into improper disposal of medical waste at several veterinary facilities in Montana. One paragraph caught Autumn's eye immediately. Additionally, authorities are reviewing licensing compliance at breeding facilities, including the well-known Wilson Kennels in Whitefish, following anonymous reports of substandard care and documentation irregularities. "This could help us," Autumn said, hope kindling. "If Wilson's operation is under scrutiny." Thomas nodded. The universe finds its balance, often in unexpected ways. The visit from Thomas reinvigorated Autumn's resolve. Working with Sarah, she launched a two-pronged strategy, legally defending against Wilson's ownership claim while simultaneously investigating his breeding operation for potential violations. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lily, the shelter volunteer who had first posted about Shadow, contacted Autumn with startling news. "I found something while organizing old files," she said, excitement evident in her voice. "The night Shadow was surrendered, our security camera was working. It was usually broken, but we'd just had it fixed that week. There's video footage of the person who brought him." The grainy security footage, when Sarah obtained it through proper legal channels, clearly showed Jack Wilson, his face partially obscured by a pulled-down cap but still recognizable, bringing Shadow into the shelter in a metal crate. The date and timestamp matched the shelter's intake records. "This changes everything," Sarah said, reviewing the footage in her office. "We can prove he personally surrendered Shadow, which legally constitutes abandonment of property." As they prepared for the upcoming court date, media interest in the case intensified. Local Montana outlets picked up the story first. "Famous rescue dog in custody battle." Then national animal welfare organizations became involved, offering legal support and publicity. By early September, Shadow's case had been featured on several national morning shows, framed as a David versus Goliath battle between a lone photographer and a powerful breeding operation. Public opinion overwhelmingly favored Autumn and Shadow. Wilson Kennel's social media pages were flooded with negative comments. Police departments that had purchased dogs from Wilson faced public pressure to investigate their supplier. The court received hundreds of letters supporting Shadow's right to remain with Autumn. Wilson, sensing the shifting tide, attempted to change tactics. 3 days before the scheduled hearing, his attorney contacted Sarah with a settlement offer. Wilson would drop his ownership claim in exchange for breeding rights to Shadow, despite his neutered status, and the use of his image and story in promotional materials for Wilson Kennels. "He wants to pretend he's the hero who allowed this wonderful dog to be rescued," Sarah explained to an incredulous Autumn. "Basically, he wants to profit from the situation while avoiding legal consequences for abandonment." "Absolutely not." Autumn responded without hesitation. The morning of the court hearing dawned clear and cool, autumn's first crispness touching the Montana air. Autumn rose early, taking Shadow for a long walk through the woods behind her cabin, drawing strength from his steady presence at her side. "Whatever happens today," she told him as they watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold, "we face it together." The courthouse in Helena was surrounded by supporters when they arrived, rescue organizations with their adopted dogs, local animal lovers holding signs with Shadow's photo, even a group of Native American elders who had traveled from several reservations to stand with Thomas Whitefeather in solidarity. Inside, the courtroom was packed to capacity. Jack Wilson sat at the plaintiff's table, expensively dressed and confident, occasionally glancing toward Autumn and Shadow with undisguised covetousness. Shadow, wearing his service vest, though he wasn't officially a service dog, the judge had allowed his presence given the nature of the case, remained calm beside Autumn's chair, his amber eyes surveying the room with dignified wariness. Judge Eleanor Martinez, a no-nonsense veteran of the bench known for her fairness but limited patience for theatrics, called the court to order. The proceedings began with opening statement from both attorneys, followed by Wilson taking the stand. He presented himself as a concerned breeder who had discovered one of his valuable puppies missing, only to later find it had somehow ended up at a shelter and been adopted out. "A dog represents a rare genetic line," Wilson testified, pointing at Shadow. "As a responsible breeder, I have an obligation to preserve those genetics. I never authorized his surrender or adoption." Sarah's cross-examination was surgical in its precision. She established Wilson's focus on breeding dogs to exacting standards, then produced shelter records showing Shadow had been surrendered specifically because he didn't meet those standards. When Wilson denied having surrendered Shadow personally, Sarah played the security camera footage. The courtroom stirred as Wilson's face clearly appeared on screen, bringing the crated Shadow into the shelter. Wilson's expression darkened, but he maintained his composure. "This could be anyone similar to me," he insisted, "and even if it were me, perhaps I was bringing in a different dog I found, as a good citizen." Sarah then called the shelter director, who testified to Shadow's condition upon intake. Underweight, fearful, showing signs of isolation and possible neglect. Dr. Thompson followed, detailing the physical and emotional trauma Shadow had exhibited when Autumn first brought him for examination. Throughout the testimony, Shadow remained a steadfast presence beside Autumn, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to the descriptions of the terrified animal he had once been. Occasionally he would press against her leg when the testimony became particularly disturbing, as if offering comfort. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted dramatically when Sarah called her final witness, Brady Kent, Jack Wilson's former assistant at the breeding facility. Brady, a thin man with nervous hands, had been subpoenaed after anonymous tips suggested he had first-hand knowledge of Shadow's early life. "Hi, Mr. Kent," Sarah began after he was sworn in. "Do you recognize the dog in this courtroom today?" Brady nodded, not meeting Wilson's glare from across the room. "Yes, ma'am. That's the pup we called Runt 3 from the April litter last year, the one with the weird coloring." "And what happened to that puppy?" Brady shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Wilson said he was defective, said he'd ruin our reputation if buyers saw him, kept him separate from the others." "And did Mr. Wilson surrender this dog to a shelter?" "Yes, ma'am. I was there when he loaded him into the truck. Said he was taking him to High Plains because they'd put him down without asking questions." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Wilson's attorney objected strenuously, but the testimony stood. By the time Brady stepped down, describing in halting detail how Shadow had been isolated, denied socialization, and intentionally hidden from potential buyers, even Judge Martinez's impassive expression had hardened. Final moments of the hearing focused on Shadow's remarkable transformation under Autumn's care. Sarah projected before and after photographs on the courtroom screen. The skeletal, terrified animal from the shelter intake photos, beside recent images of Shadow, healthy, confident. His amber eyes now reflecting intelligence and trust rather than fear. "Your Honor," Sarah concluded, "this case is fundamentally about more than property rights. It's about responsibility, care, and the moral obligation we have to the animals in our charge. Mr. Wilson deliberately abandoned this dog when he didn't meet commercial standards. Miss Running Wolf saw value where Mr. Wilson saw a defect. The bond they've formed and the transformation they've achieved together should not be severed to satisfy a belated claim motivated solely by financial interest." As the hearing concluded and Judge Martinez announced she would issue her ruling within 48 hours, Autumn felt a curious sense of peace despite the uncertainty. Whatever legal declaration followed, the truth had been spoken in that courtroom, not just about Shadow's origins, but about the darker sides of breeding practices that prioritized appearance over welfare. Inside the courthouse, as they navigated through supporters and media, Shadow stayed close to Autumn's side, occasionally meeting the eyes of children who asked to pet him. His gentle acceptance of their touch, his patient tolerance of the crowds, these were the ultimate testimony to his journey, more powerful than any legal argument could be. That evening, as they drove back toward their mountain home, the setting sun painted the landscape in hues of gold and amber that matched Shadow's extraordinary eyes. Neither knew what the judge's ruling would bring, but they faced the uncertainty together, their bond forged through shared struggle and unwavering trust, a bond that transcended any human notions of ownership or property. What they could not know, as the highway unwound before them, was that the true test of that bond still lay ahead. In a crisis neither could have anticipated. Judge Martinez's ruling came the following afternoon while Autumn and Shadow were hiking along the ridge behind their cabin. Autumn's phone buzzed with Sarah's call just as they crested the hill overlooking the valley below, the September sun bathing the landscape in golden light. "We won," Sarah announced without preamble. "The judge ruled that Wilson legally abandoned Shadow when he surrendered him to the shelter. Furthermore, she's referring his breeding operation for investigation based on the testimony about substandard care practices. You and Shadow are in the clear." Autumn sank onto a sun-warmed boulder, relief washing over her in a dizzying wave. Shadow, sensing her emotion, pressed against her legs, his amber eyes searching her face. "We did it, boy," she whispered, burying her fingers in his thick ruff. "You're staying with me. Forever." The celebration that evening was quiet but profound. A special dinner for Shadow, a glass of rare whiskey for Autumn, and a sunset walk to their favorite overlook. The legal victory felt like the closing of a chapter, the official recognition of what Autumn had known in her heart since that first day at the shelter. Shadow belonged with her. The following weeks brought a flurry of positive developments. The book project progressed rapidly, with Autumn's publisher increasing the advance based on pre-orders. Shadow's Instagram following topped 1 million after news of the court victory spread. Best of all, 3 police departments canceled their contracts with Wilson Kennels, pending investigation results, citing ethical concerns about breeding practices. "You've started something important," Dr. Thompson told Autumn during Shadow's checkup in early October. "People are asking questions about breeding standards and shelter practices that they never considered before." Esau, now fully comfortable with veterinary examinations, sat patiently as Dr. Thompson checked his heartbeat. The transformation from the terrified animal of a year ago was nothing short of miraculous. His coat gleamed with health, his eyes bright with intelligence and trust. "He's in excellent shape," Dr. Thompson confirmed, straightening, "though I'd like to do a full cardiac workup at some point, just to be safe. Some of these purebred lines can have hereditary issues, and given his unusual coloring, he might have some genetic variations worth monitoring." Whatever he needs, Autumn agreed easily. Schedule it whenever you think best. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm as autumn progressed. Mornings were spent working on the book or preparing for upcoming exhibitions. Afternoons brought long hikes through forests blazing with fall colors. Evenings found them on the porch, Shadow's head in Autumn's lap as she read, or simply watched the stars emerge above the mountains. The first sign of trouble came so subtly that Autumn almost missed it. Shadow, normally tireless on their daily hikes, began pausing to rest on steeper sections of trail. At first, Autumn attributed it to the unusually warm fall weather, or perhaps the extra treat calories from their celebration. But when he began declining his morning run, something he had previously loved, she knew something was wrong. "Seems off," she told Dr. Thompson over the phone. "Not dramatically sick, just less energetic, and he's been sleeping more." The veterinarian's voice tightened with concern. "Bring him in tomorrow morning. I'll rearrange my schedule." The examination was thorough, with Dr. Thompson paying particular attention to Shadow's heart and lungs. His expression grew increasingly grave as he listened to Shadow's chest. "I'm hearing a murmur," he said finally. "And his pulse is irregular. We need to do that cardiac workup now, not later." The next 24 hours passed in a blur of specialized tests at a veterinary cardiology center in Missoula. Shadow, ever stoic, submitted to X-rays, ultrasounds, and blood draws with dignified patience, his eyes rarely leaving Autumn's face. When the specialist, Dr. Ellie Johnson, finally sat down with Autumn in a small consultation room, her expression confirmed Autumn's worst fears before she even spoke. "Shadow has a congenital heart defect," Dr. Johnson explained gently. "It's a malformation of one of the heart valves, likely something he was born with. The condition can remain stable for years, but it appears to be progressing now." "But it can be treated?" Autumn asked, her voice tight with fear. Dr. Johnson's hesitation was answer enough. "There are medications that can help manage symptoms and slow progression. In some cases, surgical intervention is possible, but Shadow's particular defect is complex. Surgery would be high risk, and the nearest facility equipped for such specialized cardiac procedures is in Colorado." Autumn's mind raced. "Whatever it costs, wherever we need to go, just tell me what to do." "For now, we start with medication and monitor him closely. If his condition worsens rapidly, we'll discuss more aggressive options." Dr. Johnson placed a compassionate hand on Autumn's arm. "I know this is devastating news, but many dogs with this condition can still have good quality of life for months or even years with proper management." The drive back to the cabin was silent, Autumn stealing glances at Shadow in the passenger seat. He looked the same, his noble head, his unusual silver-gray coat, those intelligent amber eyes. How could something so fundamentally wrong be hidden beneath that picture of canine perfection? "Is this why Wilson rejected you?" she whispered as they drove through the gathering dusk. "Did he know your heart was imperfect?" Shadow offered no answer, simply resting his chin on her thigh in a gesture of absolute trust. The next weeks brought a new routine, twice-daily medications hidden in Shadow's food, shorter walks at a gentler pace, regular checks of his gums and breathing rate. Autumn canceled an upcoming exhibition in Seattle, unwilling to subject Shadow to the stress of travel. The book deadline was extended after she explained the situation to her understanding editor. Dr. Thompson visited weekly, monitoring Shadow's response to the medications. "He's holding steady," he reported after the third visit. "Not improving dramatically, but not declining either. That's actually good news." Autumn clung to these small victories. Every morning that Shadow greeted her with a wagging tail, every evening he settled beside her on the porch. Each became a gift, to be treasured rather than an expected routine. Word of Shadow's condition spread through his online following. Messages of support poured in, along with suggestions for treatments, recommendations for specialists, and offers of financial assistance. Autumn was touched by the outpouring, but overwhelming by its volume, eventually asking Sarah to help manage the correspondence. "People feel connected to him," Sarah explained as she sorted through hundreds of emails. "He's become more than just a dog to them. He's a symbol of resilience, of second chances." Shadow's condition remained stable through October and into November. On good days, he seemed almost normal, eager for shorter walks and engaging with visitors. On bad days, he tired easily, his breathing becoming labored with minimal exertion. Autumn learned to read his subtle cues, adapting their activities to his energy level without making him feel limited or coddled. As Thanksgiving approached, Dr. Thompson arrived for his weekly check bearing worrying news. "His latest blood work shows the medications are becoming less effective," he reported after examining Shadow. "We need to adjust the dosage, but there's a limit to how far we can push pharmaceutical management." "What are you saying?" Autumn asked, though she already knew. "I think it's time to seriously consider surgical options," the veterinarian replied. "It's high risk, yes, but doing nothing has become the greater risk." That evening, Autumn sat on the porch steps, Shadow's head heavy in her lap as snow began to fall, the first of the season. The gentle flakes brought memories of their first winter together, of Shadow's first experience with snow and the joy he had found in it. How cruel that his heart, so full of forgiveness and love despite everything humans had done to him, should be physically flawed. "We've beaten the odds before," she whispered, stroking his ears. "We'll do it again." Inside, on her laptop, lay the information for the Colorado Veterinary Specialty Center, the only facility within 1,000 miles equipped to perform the complex cardiac surgery Shadow needed. The consultation was scheduled for the following week. The estimated cost was staggering, far beyond Autumn's savings, especially after the legal battle, but the alternative, watching Shadow's condition progressively worsen, was unthinkable. As dusk deepened into night and the snow continued to fall, Autumn made her decision. She would sell whatever was necessary, her camera equipment, her collection of rare prints, even the cabin if it came to that. Shadow had given her a new vision of the world, had transformed her art and opened her heart. Now it was her turn to fight for him with everything she had. What Autumn could not know as she sat vigil through that snowy night was that Shadow's struggle would soon unite strangers across the country in ways she could never have imagined, and that the most unexpected ally was about to emerge from the shadows of their painful past. The journey to Colorado Veterinary Specialty Center was arduous. Autumn drove carefully through early winter conditions, stopping frequently to ensure Shadow remained comfortable. The car was packed with his bed, favorite toys, medications, and enough of Autumn's belongings for an extended stay. They had no way of knowing how long they would need to remain in Denver following the consultation. Shadow seemed to understand the gravity of their journey. He rested quietly in his specially arranged back seat, occasionally placing his chin on Autumn's shoulder from behind as if offering reassurance. Each time she reached back to touch his head, fighting back tears at the gesture of comfort from the one who needed comforting. The specialty center occupied a sleek modern building in a Denver suburb. Inside, behind reception desks and waiting areas designed to soothe anxious pet owners, lay state-of-the-art surgical suites and diagnostic equipment rivaling those in human hospitals. Dr. Melissa Conrad, one of the country's leading veterinary cardiologists, greeted them with professional warmth. "I've reviewed the records Dr. Thompson sent over," she explained as a technician gently led Shutter for preliminary test. "The condition is serious, but not entirely hopeless. I'd like to run our own diagnostics before discussing options." The morning passed in a blur of tests and consultations. Shadow, stoic as ever, submitted to each procedure with quiet dignity. By afternoon, Dr. Conrad had assembled a complete picture of his cardiac condition. "The defect is called mitral valve dysplasia," she explained, showing Autumn ultrasound images on a high-resolution monitor. "It's congenital. He was born with it. The valve that prevents blood from flowing backward into the heart chamber doesn't close properly." "Can it be repaired?" Autumn asked, voicing the only question that mattered. Dr. Conrad's expression was carefully measured. "There's a surgical procedure that could help. It's complex and carries significant risks, but without intervention, Shadow's condition will continue to deteriorate. Given his age and otherwise excellent health, he's actually a good candidate." The relief washed over Autumn until Dr. Conrad mentioned the cost. Over $30,000 for the surgery alone, with aftercare potentially adding thousands more. The figure represented more than Autumn's entire annual income in some years. "I understand it's substantial," Dr. Conrad said, noting Autumn's expression. "Take some time to consider. We can discuss payment plans, or there are organizations that sometimes provide assistance for cases like this." That evening, in a pet-friendly hotel near the veterinary center, Autumn faced the brutal arithmetic of Shadow's care. Her savings, even combined with the advance from her book publisher, fell woefully short. Selling her professional camera equipment would help, but not enough. The cabin was mortgaged and would take too long to sell anyway. Shadow watched her from his bed as she made call after call. To her bank, to credit card companies, to organizations that provided financial assistance for pet medical care. Most offered sympathy but limited concrete help. By midnight, exhausted and despairing, Autumn finally surrendered to sleep, Shadow's head resting against her arm. Morning brought an unexpected call from Sarah Redfeather. "I've been thinking about Shadow's situation," the attorney said without preamble. "Have you considered a fundraiser? His story has touched thousands of people. Many would want to help if given the chance." "I couldn't ask strangers for money," Autumn protested. "People offer help because it gives their lives meaning," Sarah countered. "Allowing them to contribute to Shadow's care isn't asking for charity. It's offering them a chance to be part of something meaningful." With reluctance, Autumn agreed. By afternoon, Sarah had organized an online fundraising campaign, complete with Shadow's story, photos from his journey, and details about his medical needs. Autumn approved the page with low expectations, worn down by worry rather than hopeful for results. The response defied all predictions. Within 24 hours, the campaign had raised over $5,000. By the third day, as the story spread across social media platforms and was picked up by local news outlets, donations surpassed 15,000. Messages flooded in alongside contributions. Stories of personal connections to rescue animals, expressions of gratitude for Shadow's inspiration, promises of prayers and healing thoughts. Then came the twist that no one could have anticipated. On the fourth day of the fundraiser, as the total approached $20,000, a single anonymous donation of $25,000 appeared with a simple message. "For Shadow's heart. I know what it's like to be rejected for being different." The substantial contribution left Autumn speechless. Who would donate such an amount anonymously? The timing was perfect. Shadow's surgery was scheduled for the following week, and the funds ensured they could proceed without delay. The mystery deepened that afternoon when a package arrived at Autumn's hotel, addressed simply to Shadow's person. Inside was a handwritten letter on expensive stationery. I followed Shadow's court case with interest. My father is Jack Wilson. I was raised at that breeding facility, watching dogs being valued or discarded based on arbitrary standards. When I was 18, I left and never returned, unable to stomach the practices I witnessed. The money comes from my inheritance. I can think of no better use for it than saving the dog my father threw away. Shadow deserves this second chance. We all do. The letter was signed simply, Brady Kent, the former assistant who had testified against Wilson in court. Autumn sat on the hotel bed, letter in hand, as the full circle of events washed over her. The same breeding facility that had deemed Shadow worthless had inadvertently funded his salvation. There was poetic justice in using Wilson blood money to heal the heart his cruelty had ignored. The day before Shadow's surgery, an unexpected visitor arrived at the veterinary center during their pre-operative appointment. Thomas Whitefeather, the Northern Cheyenne elder, had traveled all the way from Montana, despite his age and the winter weather. "I had a dream," he explained simply when Autumn expressed surprise at his appearance. "The dog with medicine needs medicine himself now. I came to sing healing songs." With the veterinary staff's respectful permission, Thomas performed a traditional blessing over Shadow in a quiet corner of the garden behind the center. Shadow, who had grown increasingly lethargic as his condition worsened, sat with unusual alertness throughout the ceremony, his amber eyes fixed on the elder's face as sacred songs filled the cold. "He understands," Thomas said afterward, his weathered hand resting gently on Shadow's head. "His spirit is strong, even when his body is weak. This is not his ending time." The morning of the surgery dawned clear and cold. Dr. Conrad reviewed the procedure one final time, explaining each step with careful precision. The operation would last approximately 6 hours if all went well, with another critical period of 24 hours following as Shadow's heart adjusted to its repaired valve. "The success rate is about 70%, she concluded honestly. But Shadow has several factors in his favor: his age, his overall physical condition apart from the heart issue, and frankly, his remarkable will to live. I've rarely seen an animal with such evident determination." The moment of surrender came all too quickly. Autumn knelt beside Shadow in the preoperative area, cradling his noble head between her hands, pressing her forehead to his. "You fight," she whispered fiercely. "You've overcome everything else. You can overcome this, too. I'll be right here, waiting." Shadow's response was to gently lick her cheek once, a gesture so uncharacteristically demonstrative that tears sprang immediately to Autumn's eyes. Then the technicians were leading him away, his silver-gray form disappearing through swinging doors, leaving Autumn alone with her fears and hopes in the sterile waiting room. What followed were the longest hours of Autumn's life. 6 months later, on a perfect Montana spring morning, Shadow stood at the edge of a meadow behind Autumn's cabin, his powerful form silhouetted against the rising sun. His silver-gray coat, now luxurious and gleaming with health, rippled in the gentle breeze. At Autumn's soft whistle he turned, amber eyes bright with life, and bounded toward her with the fluid grace that had once seemed lost forever. The surgery had been a success, though not without complications. Shadow's heart had stopped briefly during the procedure, requiring emergency measures to restart it. For 3 terrifying days afterward, he had remained in critical condition, his survival hanging in the balance. Autumn had barely left his side, sleeping on a cot beside his recovery kennel, her hand resting on his chest to feel each precious heartbeat. "He's fighting hard," Dr. Conrad had told her on the 4th day, when Shadow finally showed signs of improvement, "and I think he's fighting for you as much as for himself." The road to recovery had been long. December melted into January as Shadow slowly regained strength at the specialty center in Denver. January gave way to February before he was deemed stable enough to return to Montana, where his rehabilitation continued under Dr. Thompson's watchful care. Each week brought small victories. A longer walk, a more playful moment, a night of uninterrupted sleep without the labored breathing that had become so frighteningly normal. Now, in late April, almost exactly 2 years since his birth and subsequent rejection, Shadow was whole again. The long scar on his chest had faded to a thin white line, visible only when the wind parted his fur just so. His energy had returned fully, his love of running and exploring restored as if he'd never known illness. "Looking good, big guy," Autumn called as he reached her side, pressing against her leg in his characteristic gesture of affection. She knelt to embrace him, breathing in his familiar scent, marveling, as she often did, at the journey that had brought them together. The cabin had changed in the months following Shadow's surgery. The modest studio where Autumn had once worked alone had expanded into a proper office with assistants who helped manage her growing photography business and Shadow's substantial social media presence. A separate building housed the newly established Shadow's Heart Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to providing medical care for unadoptable shelter animals. The foundation had been Brady Kent's idea. After Shadow's successful surgery, he had stepped forward publicly, revealing his identity as the anonymous donor and offering to help establish a permanent legacy from Shadow's story. The son of Jack Wilson had become an unlikely ally, using his business acumen and connections to create something meaningful from his family's controversial history. "Every animal deserves the chance Shadow got," Brady had said at the foundation's launch event, "and every person deserves the chance to be more than their worst mistakes or the legacy they were born into." Jack Wilson himself had faded from public view after the investigation into his breeding practices resulted in multiple violations and the eventual closure of his facility. The German Shepherds from his kennel had been placed with rescue organizations, many finding homes with families who loved them for their individual personalities, rather than their conformity to breed standards. The book about Shadow's journey had been published in March to critical acclaim and strong sales. Titled The Heart You Cannot See, it paired Autumn's stunning photography with the story of a dog rejected for being different who had ultimately changed countless lives through his resilience. The cover featured a striking close-up of Shadow's amber eyes, windows to the extraordinary soul that had survived abandonment, near death, and heart failure without losing its capacity for trust and love. Most remarkably, Shadow himself had discovered his purpose beyond mere survival. During his convalescence in Denver, the veterinary staff had noticed his unusual ability to detect distress in other animals. A cat in cardiac distress would receive Shadow's focused attention before monitors showed any change in vital signs. A dog recovering from trauma would find Shadow lying quietly beside its kennel during visiting hours. Dr. Conrad had been the first to suggest formalizing this apparent gift. After appropriate training and certification, Shadow now served as both the face of his foundation and a working therapy dog, visiting hospitals and rehabilitation centers throughout Montana. His particular specialty became providing comfort to children undergoing cardiac treatment, his own scar a visible reminder that healing was possible, even from the most serious heart condition. "Children see him differently," a pediatric nurse had observed during one of their regular visits to the regional medical center. "They don't pity him for his scar, they see it as a badge of courage, and somehow he always seems to know which child needs him most on any given day." On this particular spring morning, as Shadow and Autumn completed their dawn walk and returned to the cabin, a small gathering awaited them. Dr. Thompson's truck was parked beside Thomas Whitefeather's older sedan. Sarah Redfeather stood on the porch deep in conversation with Brady Kent and Lily from the shelter. They had come to celebrate the one-year anniversary of Shadow's rescue, a tradition they had all agreed would continue annually for as long as Shadow lived. "There he is," Lily called, her face lighting with joy as Shadow approached. "Our miracle boy." Shadow greeted each person in turn, a gentle press against a leg here, a momentary lean of his substantial weight there, a brief meeting of eyes that somehow conveyed recognition and appreciation. For these humans who had fought for him when he couldn't fight for himself, he reserved a special quality of attention that never failed to move them. Breakfast was served on the porch. Coffee and pastries for the humans, a special treat of scrambled eggs for Shadow. Conversation flowed easily among people who had become connected through extraordinary circumstances. They shared updates on their lives, on the Foundation's progress, on the changes in animal welfare legislation that their combined advocacy had helped advance in Montana. As the morning sun rose higher, casting the mountains in perfect golden light, Autumn found herself momentarily apart from the group, standing at the edge of the porch with Shadow beside her. She placed her hand on his back, feeling the strong, steady heartbeat beneath her fingers. "We made it," she whispered. Shadow looked up at her, those amber eyes reflecting a wisdom and understanding that transcended species. In that gaze was everything that needed to be said. About second chances and healing, about finding purpose in pain, about the capacity of love to transform even the most broken beginnings into something beautiful and whole. The dog once labeled a monster, once deemed worthless and thrown away, had become not just a beloved companion, but a living testament to what remained possible when someone chose to see value where others saw only flaws. His journey from death row to becoming a healer of hearts, both literal and metaphorical, was complete. And yet it was also just beginning. Shadow's journey reminds us that it's never too late for a second chance. Like many of us in our golden years, he faced rejection when society deemed him flawed and different. Remember when we were told we were too old, too set in our ways, or somehow less valuable? Shadow's story speaks to that pain, but it also shows us the extraordinary resilience we all possess. When Autumn saw worth where others saw only defects, she didn't just save Shadow's life. She revealed his true purpose. Many of us understand what it means to reinvent ourselves after loss or hardship. We know how it feels when the heart falters, both literally and figuratively. Shadow's scar, like our own wrinkles and battle marks, tells a story of survival and triumph. His transformation from a discarded monster to a healer of children's hearts mirrors the journey many of us have taken from feeling cast aside to discovering our deepest value lies in the wisdom and compassion our struggles have taught us. Shadow reminds us that our most powerful days may still lie ahead, and that the heart's capacity for renewal remains our greatest miracle, no matter our age. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.